Thank you. And Commissioners, we will now have Ira Goldapper, our Deputy Commissioner for Uniformed Service Bureaus, give us a presentation on enforcement at the airports.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ira Goldapper, Deputy Commissioner for Uniformed Services Bureau. As you're aware, the Uniformed Services Bureau consists of the Safety and Emissions Division, which inspects taxis and for-hire vehicles at our inspection facility, and the Enforcement Division, which patrols the city to ensure drivers are driving safely and complying with TLC rules and New York vehicle traffic law. I'm here to provide a brief update regarding the Enforcement Division's operations at our airports. The four main areas of focus at the airports are unlicensed for hire activity, the hustling and solicitation. Plainly speaking, these are individuals either in or around the terminals soliciting passengers for trips. Oftentimes they work in groups with a spotter or solicitor in the terminal, and then soliciting passengers and then walking those passengers to the partners' cars, either to the front of the terminal or into the parking garages. These are not TLC licensed vehicles, and they are not TLC licensed drivers. Illegal street hails, licensed for hire vehicles picking up a hailing customer, not prearranged. Often at the airports, it may be seen as they drop off a passenger and they either they cruise around the airport and the terminals looking to pick up a passenger for their trip back. Line cutting, when taxi cab drivers skip the central taxi hold lots at the airports and instead drive directly to the terminals, either join up on the taxi queue at the terminal, or they also will cruise terminals looking to pick up passengers. And those taxi drivers refusing to engage the meter is another focus. They're not engaging the meter, essentially creating an unauthorized flat fare that's off the grid. So we focus on unlicensed for hire activity because it poses a danger to the public as well as the industry. Unlicensed drivers are, like I said, not TLC licensed. They're not operating out of inspected vehicles. Our Safety and Emissions Division inspects all taxis and licensed for hire vehicles for rider safety. These are not licensed drivers who have undergone a background check by our licensing division. There's no drug testing of them. There's no driver safety courses. Oftentimes, these drivers are operating a vehicle without a valid driver's license at all. There's also a lack of appropriate for hire insurance. These drivers do not have the proper insurance to cover any injuries or damages while illegally operating for hire, therefore limiting the recourse of injured passengers may have. There's also a lack of base affiliation and trip records. Should a driver grossly overcharge a passenger, assault a passenger, or worse, it is difficult for passengers to identify the individual or their vehicle, making it extremely difficult to catch these individuals after the fact. The trip, and oftentimes the vehicle itself, is essentially off the grid. We've received complaints from passengers who have been taken advantage of, including those passengers being charged exorbitant amounts through fear and intimidation once in the vehicle, and even when picking up passenger accomplices on the way. They'll get into the vehicle, go on their trip, and next thing you know, the driver stops and picks up another person who ends up being a part of this scheme. These individuals often prey on travelers from overseas, making JFK Airport a real focal point for these hustlers. It's also a danger to the industry. Taking work from licensed drivers. These hustlers are taking work from those drivers who are doing it properly, paying for the proper TLC license and appropriate insurance. Even with the enforcement occurring, TLC licensed drivers may not see it and get frustrated. Oftentimes our operations at the airports are in plain clothes, so they may not be aware that we are in fact out there. And the last thing anyone wants to see are TLC licensed drivers giving up their licenses to operate illegally themselves. At the end of the day, that would be a tremendous loss for the riding public. Similarly, illegal street hails are a danger to the public and the industry. There's no record of the trip. Although these are TLC licensed vehicles that have undergone proper TLC and safety inspections and may have TLC licensed drivers, this is a problem because the trips, similar to those that are unlicensed, are essentially off the grid. There is no trip record for these trips because they haven't been dispatched by a base, and we have the same difficulties holding these drivers accountable based on complaints from the public. It is incredibly difficult to identify the driver, and oftentimes the passengers don't have the license plate number on the vehicle that they were in. At times, we come across drivers of TLC licensed vehicles who do not have a TLC license or a valid driver's license at all, particularly when we conduct interagency enforcement with NYPD, MTA, and others at the bridges and tunnels. It's also one of the reasons our officers issue summonses and warnings to licensed drivers who do not have their hack license displayed. It's incredibly necessary that a member of the public can easily discern whether a driver of a TLC licensed vehicle is in fact licensed by the TLC. And again, there's a harm to the taxi industry, as these drivers are taking work from taxi drivers and owners who pay a premium for the right to accept street hails. We also focus on line cutting at the airports because it creates chaos and safety concerns. Getting in and out of the airports already can be hectic enough. Taxi cabs cruising at the terminals or cutting the lines only make it more chaotic. Those drivers are also taking work away from the drivers who are doing it properly. And at times, these drivers become aggressive with the taxi dispatchers who are only trying to enforce the taxi queues at the airport. There may be underlying issues with the taxi cabs that prevent them from entering the taxi hold lots in the first place. One such issue may be when the taxi cab itself is suspended. If the vehicle license for the taxi cab is suspended, they will not be permitted into the taxi hold lot. More often than not, the meter is also shut down as a result of the suspension. At this point, the dangers become very similar to an unlicensed for hire vehicle, and it is imperative to get these vehicles off the road. Even worse, some of the drivers renting out the taxis may be unaware that the vehicle's license has been suspended. So we began confiscating rate cards to raise a big red flag, allowing the drivers to be aware when renting the vehicles. We focus on refusals to engage the meters because of the potential for abuse and overcharging. Lack of a trip record, similar with illegal street hails similar with illegal street hails, these trips would be essentially off the grid, making it difficult to take appropriate action against the driver based on a passenger's complaint. Our officers cannot be everywhere at once, and customer complaints play a vital role in enforcement. Appropriate taxes and fees, including the taxi improvement surcharge, which is important to get more accessible vehicles on the road, are not collected when a driver fails to engage the meter. As the iconic taxi cab is indicative of safe metered ride in which passengers will be treated fairly, ending this behavior is important not only for the protection of the passenger, but also for taxi drivers. Combating these issues as a whole are important for the safety of the riding public as well as the industry. Those who unlawfully solicit ground transportation at an airport are in violation of New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law 1220B, which is a traffic infraction with progressive penalties. The first violation is up to a $750 fine. The second, within 18 months, is up to a $1,500 fine, and the third and subsequent violations are $2,000 fines. Those who engage in unlicensed for hire activity are in violation of New York City Administrative Code 19506. First offense is up to a $1,500 fine. The second and subsequent offenses within 36 months is up to a $2,000 fine. Repeat offenders' vehicles may also be seized pending forfeiture proceedings. To combat this behavior, We conduct joint operations with Port Authority Police Department, specifically targeting hustlers in the terminals as well as the unlicensed for hire operators outside. The Port Authority has been a terrific partner in this endeavor, and I want to thank them for their great work. We also conduct our own enforcement based on our officers' observations while in plain clothes, as well as undercover operations wherein they pose as passengers coming out of the terminals. We do the same for illegal street hails, line cutting, and refusal to engage the meter. Moving unlicensed for hire operators away from the terminals has assisted in enforcement efforts. Because cars cannot park in front of the terminals and are pushed away, hustlers often utilize the parking garages, either waiting to get a call from a solicitor inside or parking and going themselves into the terminal to solicit. Vehicles used as part of any unlicensed for hire activity at the airports are prevented from gaining entry into the parking garages. This forces them back to the frontage of the terminals where it's easier to spot them, move them away before they can get a passenger, and conduct enforcement should they accept the passenger. Public awareness is another vital tool. Port Authority has increased signage inside the terminals, advising travelers to use a taxi cab or other prearranged car service, warning against hustlers. There is also increased signage in the terminals as well as announcements on the public announcement. To date, we've issued over 1,100 summonses at the airports so far for unlicensed for hire activity, illegal street hails, and solicitations this calendar year. To further our enforcement efforts at the airports, we are taking the following steps. Port Authority has freed up more space for us to expand at JFK. We are currently in the process of renovating the new office space, which will enable us to dispatch up to 50 officers directly from our JFK office, which is more than double our current capacity. To that end, we have to fill that office space. Mayor Adams has authorized the hiring of 100 new officers, and we will begin a recruiting program to make those hires. While we currently have 20 cadets in our USB training academy, we have taken steps to increase our training capacity to satisfy classes of up to 65 cadets by training more officers to become certified training instructors, enabling us to have 2 academy classes at the same time without losing quality. We have also started the process of getting accredited by the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. This will enable us to offer our own state-mandated peace officer trainings, as well as the training and certification of instructors, which is currently being done by CUNY. To help combat illegal for hire activity and these other areas of concern, we will be engaging in a public safety campaign to educate the public about the dangers of illegal for hire activity and how to identify properly licensed vehicles and increase and drivers. We have already started this by working with TLC's Community Affairs to increase greater engagement with the public at Van Halen events and other community-focused events. We will be utilizing safety vehicles on social media and are looking to also include testimonials from victims. While Port Authority has already increased messaging within the terminals, they are working with air carriers to make similar announcements about illegal for hire activity to their passengers as they arrive at the airports. Port Authority is also currently working on an app for drivers that will show the medallion number of those taxis that have been dispatched properly to the taxi queues from the hold lot. This information may be similarly displayed on installed monitors at those queues to make it easier for everyone to identify line cutters. This increased transparency will not only deter line cutters, but also any taxi dispatchers thinking about taking kickbacks from drivers to allow them to cut the line. Rather than relying on officers in the field to enforce against line cutting, we will be further utilizing technology, comparing trip data from taxi cabs with Port Authority's data from their hold lots. We will be able to identify those trips in which taxi drivers cut the line. Working with Port Authority and TLC's prosecution unit, we have already started the analysis, and I believe the first batch of summonses will be issued shortly. This will free up our officers for greater enforcement on illegal for hire activity at the airports. And we will continue to seek new ways to utilize technology to regulate the for hire industry more effectively and efficiently. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioner Goldapper. And thank you to the TLC police for ensuring that our passengers remain safe and not hustled at the airports, and also to ensure that trips go to licensed drivers with the proper insurance to protect not only the driver, but also the passengers. At this time, are there any questions from the commissioners?
Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm on. It wasn't a question, it was just more of an observation. I think the public education campaign is great, and just the comment that you made that a lot of the victims are people who are engaging in international travel. So hopefully that education campaign covers different languages and is able to kind of reach out to those different communities, so that you're reaching the people who are maybe the most victimized. That was my only comment.
Absolutely.
Thank you
I couldn't
so
agree
much.
with you more.
Any other questions from the commissioners? All right. Well, thank you so much, Commissioner.